everyone, it's Tyrone May here, Himalaya ride enthusiast and entrepreneur. I'm back once again to bring you chapter 6 from my book, The Himalaya, where the strobe flashes and the mirror ball spins. Basically, my book is about my fascination with the Himalaya ride and my dream to have one of my own someday. See if you'd like to purchase your copy. You can go on Amazon or on my online store. You can get my book, also Himalaya fan base merch, as you can see here. But I'll just show below the screen. So without further ado, I'm going to step inside and bring you chapter 6 from my book. Alright, so here we are now. I'm bringing you chapter 6 from my book, titled Something's Missing. The year was 1989, and Fair Week had returned for another year. Weeks before, I started counting down the days to the first night of the fair as usual. Finally, the night arrived. My mother and I dropped my brother off at my grandmother's before heading towards Harrington Fairgrounds because she felt that the fair would be way too noisy for him since he was still a baby. We went to our usual parking spot behind the fairgrounds, stepped out of the car, and started walking down that same trail that leads us back to the Himalaya. I began soaking up the usual sights and sounds from the ride, such as the music, the siren, and the screaming crowd, along with the flashing of those string of white boarding lights that the operator usually played with when he cranked the ride to its fullest speed. This time, however, I didn't see the strobe light flashing, which was slightly odd, but I really didn't pay any mind. I was just happy to see the ride at its usual spot for another great year. As I walked closer to the ride, I noticed parts of the Himalaya's tunnel laying on the ground alongside the ride for some unknown reason. As I rushed to the front of the ride, I noticed everything was in its place except for the tunnel. The ride just had the back scenery panels which surrounded half the ride. This is odd, I thought to myself, because I had never seen a Himalaya like that before. I mean, without its tunnel. Also, for the first time, this Himalaya only ran forward, but I really didn't care. I just wanted to ride it. I proceeded with my usual fair routine, riding the other rides first and saving the Himalaya as my highlight of my night. As soon as that time arrived, I had to actually find someone to ride the Himalaya with me because my mother didn't really feel like riding anything. I wasn't sure if I could ride this one by myself, and I was too intimidated to try. I asked at least 10 people I knew, but they all pretty much chickened out, so I began to protest loudly that I wasn't leaving this fair until I rode that Himalaya. Finally, I spotted my cousin Shanita, who had ridden it with me during the fair of 1985. I had asked her if she wanted to ride the Himalaya with me. Shanita accepted my request, and she got her tickets ready before we went up the stairs. As we rode the Himalaya, I became very happy because I knew my whole night was complete. After taking my last glimpse of hearing the sounds of the tunnelless Himalaya as the grand finale of the night, we headed home. I happily slept in my bed and dreamt about the ride all through the night. A few days later, I spent the day with my father, and he took me and my younger cousin TJ to the fair for the day. This time, my father parked in the same spot where my mother normally parked, which was on the other side of the midway. Just like the last time when my father took me to the fair, I decided to ride the Himalaya first, which was unusual, but there was no line this time. I asked TJ if he wanted to ride the Himalaya with me, but he was afraid to, so I decided to go on the ride by myself. As soon as my father gave me the tickets, I rushed over to the ride and gave one of the workers my tickets. Then I tried to find a good seat until suddenly another worker out of nowhere stopped me in my tracks, put his arm around me, and then escorted me to another seat, sending me with a total stranger. Unlike the Himalaya in Ocean City, I apparently couldn't ride this particular Himalaya by myself for some strange reason. As the ride started, I suddenly couldn't really enjoy myself because during that single moment, things just felt ruined for me. As the ride finally ended, I was ready to depart and immediately went to another ride, which was the first for me. My next bizarre experience took place at the Wave Swinger, one of my usual choices of rides. It was normally the first ride I attend to get my adrenaline going, but again, I just could not seem to enjoy myself that day because my mind was too busy thinking about what had happened to me at the Himalaya. As soon as the swing ride ended, I tried to find my way out. The railing at the time looked like a maze to me. I normally didn't have a problem finding my way out, but again, my mind was still stuck on my unusual experience on the Himalaya. Seconds later, a worker from the swing ride started to give me a hard time because I had trouble finding the exit, and I knew that I wasn't the only one who had that problem. After riding the Wave Swinger, I decided to take a break from riding, so we started walking around the fair. I was watching the Himalaya as it performed its usual routine with the operator talking his usual smack on the microphone. But at the same time, I spent minutes trying to figure out what the heck had gone wrong that day. Things just weren't normal for me, and I was not having a good time. Finally, we decided to call it a day because I was just not in the mood to ride anymore. We walked past the Himalaya and I watched and listened while walking towards the car. But this time I was ready to go home for a change. Such an unusual experience. A couple of nights later I went back to the fair, but this time I was there with my mother and Aunt Christine. It was on the special night that the fair had every year when everybody pays a certain price for a special wristband and hand stamp to ride the rides all day until closing. A couple of nights later I went back to the fair, but this time I was there with my mother and Aunt Christine. It was on the special night that the fair had every year when everybody pays a certain price for a special wristband and hand stamp to ride all the rides all day until closing. That night was usually the busiest night of the whole 10 days of the fair. I usually saw most of my friends that I went to school with or kids from my neighborhood during those nights. There were lines everywhere during that evening, long ones. The lines seemed to reach 2 miles long. As my night began, I decided to go back to my original routine in the hopes that I'd have a good time, especially after my previous visit. I went on some other rides first, then would end my night riding the Himalaya because after what had happened to me the last time I was there, I wanted to start the evening right. After I had been on my fair share of rides, that special time arrived. It was time to get back to the Himalaya, and I was determined to find somebody to ride with me, even if it took all night long. I had enough tickets for my last ride, so I was ready. But as we headed towards the ride, the line for the Himalaya reached about 4 rides away. This ride had the longest line of any other ride at the whole fair. Though the line for the Himalaya was extremely long, I still wanted to ride it. My mother, on the other hand, was ready to leave the fair for the night. I begged and pleaded as hard as I could because the Himalaya was the main reason that I went to the fair in the first place. But unfortunately that night I had to leave the fair without riding the Himalaya, the ride of all rides. My night felt so incomplete, not to mention ruined yet again. What made it so bad was I really wanted to make up for what had happened to me during my last visit to the fair, but I just didn't get the chance to make things right that evening. As we walked past the Himalaya, I tearfully watched the ride for the last time as the music, the siren, and the screaming riders started to fade as we got closer to the car and left the fair for the last time that year. A month later, I decided to work on another model, but this time I went back to copying the artwork from the Himalaya at the fair. I had done a little more studying when I was actually on the ride, even during those unusual moments, so I tried to make my drawings look a little more like the original artwork. On this one, I took a little more time with making the seats. This time I designed the seats so you can cut them out and fold them together, which worked out perfectly at the time. To make things even better, I had a chance to own a real strobe light, which my mother bought me from Radio Shack. The strobe light, however, was too bright and way too bulky to fit into my model, so I had to cut a small hole in the center of the back scenery in my model so the strobe light could flash through the hole inside the model. As soon as my model was complete, I was ready to turn on the radio and let my imagination run free. I was still kind of bummed out about not riding the Himalaya at the fair during my last visit, and I knew that I would not have a chance to ride it again until the following year. However, I had a chance to redeem myself when we made our return to Ocean City, Maryland a month later. After the fair ended, I was ready to go back to Ocean City because I now knew that I could ride their Himalaya by myself without any problems. As we arrived at Ocean City, I looked at the amusement park at the end of the boardwalk where the Himalaya was normally located. This time, however, the Matterhorn was sitting in the spot where the Himalaya normally sat. Apparently, the Himalaya and the Matterhorn had somehow switched places. I purchased my tickets at the booth, which was now in front of the Himalaya, and rushed up those pink stairs and gave the worker my tickets as he opened the lap bar for me. I sat in my seat with a huge smile on my face because not only I was on the ride, but I had the seat all to myself. I started looking at all the lights on the Himalaya, wishing it was nighttime, but I was there riding the ride, so it didn't matter. As the ride started, I just sat back and relaxed while this wonderful ride did its magic. Backwards, then forwards, while the music played from the stereo system and the mirror ball went spinning with the ride as it cranked up to its highest speed. After the ride stopped, I got off the ride, forgetting all about what had happened to me at the fair. After the rides, we went on the boardwalk, bought some candy, shopped for souvenirs, and started heading back to Dover, Delaware. And there you have it. That was chapter 6. Hope you enjoyed it so far. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and let me know what you think. And of course, if you'd like to buy my book, you can buy it on Amazon or my online store, along with some tons of fan-based merch. I'll be back on here next month with Chapter 7. But as for today, I'll be enjoying the day riding my favorite toys. So, see you next month for Chapter 7. Take care.